Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our series of tutorial on commerce. We've been talking about financial issues, and our topic right now is that of money and banking. And let's talk about international bank structure. There is no worldwide banking system that is comparable in terms of policy making and regulatory power to the system of any industrialized nation. Rather, worldwide banking stability relies on a loose structure of agreements among individual countries or groups of countries. More so to talk about some of the big names in international banking structure, we have the World Bank and we have the IMF, International Monetary Fund. Two United Nations agencies, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, help to finance international trade. Unlike the true banks, the World Bank, technically the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, a UN agency, provides only a very limited scope of services. For instance, it funds the national improvement by making loans to build roads, schools, power plants, and hospitals. The resulting improvements eventually enable borrowing countries to increase productive capacity and international trade. Another UN agency, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, is a group of some 150 nations that have combined resources for the following purposes. Purpose number one, to promote the stability of exchange rates. Purpose number two, to provide temporary short term loans to member countries. Purpose number three, to encourage members to cooperate on international monetary issues. And purpose number four, to encourage development of a system for international payments. The IMF makes loans to the nations suffering from temporary negative trade balances by making it possible for these countries to continue buying products from other countries. The IMF facilitates international trade. However, some nations have declined IMF funds rather than accept the economic changes that the IMF demands. For example, some developing countries reject the IMF requirement that they cut back social programs and spending in order to bring inflation under control. And then there are other things as well. It's a UN agency that sometimes, one way or the other, has got political motives as well. And this is where it does not serve only as a monetary institution but becomes a technically political institution, diplomatic institution. And those who play the big role in money want to assert themselves with the big role in diplomacy. And this is what has been happening to the third world nations. This is what has happened to the poor nations, those who have the constraint of resources. And it usually happens with those nations who have a poor structure of government, instability in the nation, and haven't really performed well enough in the trade and productivity sector. So they engulf themselves in the problems, and this is where the bigger nations find their hands on such poor nations and they exploit them. It happens in the democratic era, and it used to happen in the agrarian era, in any of the previous era, that the poorer, weakers are exploited. The same is happening in the democratic era of the world today. The same is happening in the 21st century, that the poorers and the weakers are exploited. And then the bigger nations want to dictate their terms. Sometimes, for a country to go bankrupt is not in its interest. Of course, it is not in the interest of any country to go bankrupt. But then at the same time, it is not even in the interest of the superpowers for a nation to go bankrupt. So when IMF comes along and rescues them, IMF does not rescue them for their interest, but IMF rescues them for the interest of these superpowers. So IMF comes there, rescues them for the interest of the superpowers, not for the interest of those poor and weaker nations.